Shane Robinson is a former Maryland State Delegate. He's an educator and an environmental advocate. He served 2 terms in the Maryland House of Delegates, where he focused on energy policy, environmental protection, and public education. He served on the Environmental Matters Committee. He later chaired the Montgomery County House delegation, and after leaving public office, Shane transitioned into education and now works as a high school teacher. He brings the insider's perspective on how the legislative process actually works and how citizens and voters can effectively engage in it. With that, welcome, Shane.
Thank you. Thanks, Andy. Thanks, Owen. Good to see you guys.
Yeah, glad you're here.
How are you feeling today, Shane?
Good. It's good to be home. Just another day in the classroom, and now it's night, and I'm decompressing, and this is a great way to do it.
Excellent. And I thought that when Owen mentioned that you wanted to come on at some point, I thought this was a perfect day for you to come on. What better than to have somebody who is in the chair, not in the gallery, on these days in the past, come and talk to us about the opening of the legislative session. So I'm so glad you're here. I'm so glad we can have this conversation, and let's get into it. So can you tell us about your time in Annapolis, and from the time you decided to run to the time that you left and went back into the classroom?
Yeah, so I guess I decided to run in 2010, so a long time ago now. Time really flies. So it'll be 4 sessions ago at this point. I was working in the nonprofit sector, and with any nonprofit, it's going to interface with government in some capacity. So I was involved in advocacy work and that type of thing. And the more I got involved, the more I realized that legislators are just regular people. And that got me thinking, hey, this could be interesting to get more involved and maybe run someday, because it could be a way to affect change and hopefully end suffering for people, or decrease suffering rather, and just maybe increase happiness and well-being. And I wasn't planning on running that year. I wanted to learn more and kind of work into it over time. But one of the delegates in the district that I was living in decided to run for senator and left an open delegate spot. And people, I guess, didn't see this coming because there wasn't really anybody in the waiting in the wings for this. So I threw my hat in the ring and managed to win. And then suddenly I was a delegate before I really was thinking that I would be, but very excited and thinking that I would be able to go down and just change a lot of things, just like we learned in school about how a bill becomes a law. I found out during my first term that it's more complicated. It's actually not more complicated. It is. I mean, there is a process, and the process is transparent, but there are a lot of people involved, and there's just a mass amount of legislation and processes behind that legislation, and it's very hard to follow everything. And you kind of need to be there and looking at it with your fingers on it when the decisions are happening. So I feel like I spent my first term sort of figuring that out, and it was really, really enjoying it. I think it was my second term when I ran for the chair of the Montgomery County House delegation, where things got a little bit less fun because I was dealing with county politics and then all the personalities that came into play with that. And so I was also learning a lot and had an opportunity to affect more change, but it was more difficult. And at the same time, I think I was putting in more difficult legislation, so that you run into conflict and things just become less fun, probably, but in a good way, because hopefully you can be more effective. So the second term, about midway, I decided I probably didn't want to run again. I was thinking, this is good, but it's not what I thought it was going to be. Maybe I can affect change in other ways, other than this as a legislator. But I really never, I never actually pulled the plug. and just sort of with inertia, just kind of kept running. I was part of a legislative team, and but thankfully my constituents had other ideas, and they didn't reelect me, so it ended anyway. And then my life changed, and now I'm teaching high school, and which is really great and completely different than being a legislator in Maryland.
Yeah, so I have a question kind of about that transition, but you mentioned some more difficult legislation, so that kind of piqued my interest. And do you have an example of a piece, like a piece of legislation that you were really excited about, maybe during your second term?
Well, there were a few that I was excited about. I think towards the end of my first term, the fracking ban, the ban on fracking, that actually ended up passing, and that was in the end, it was sponsored by Delegate Fraser Hidalgo, who's still there, and several others. But a big one, my last session was it was a clean energy bill, and the idea behind that would be to change the RPS. Actually get rid of the RPS. And for those of you that aren't aware of the acronyms, it's a renewable portfolio standard. And basically what that means is currently in Maryland, I believe we're still under the 2019 legislation that became law that says that by 2030, I think it is, Maryland, by 2030, we need to get to 50% renewable energy, but through the renewable portfolio standard. And what that means is we don't actually buy renewable energy directly from, say, a wind farm, right, or a solar farm. We can buy the energy wherever, just on the open market, and then we offset it by buying renewable energy credits. Right. So I guess a way to say this would be you could have like a wind farm in Ohio, for example, and they're selling electricity to people in Ohio, so a different part of the PJM grid, and people in Ohio are getting the energy. Meanwhile, you could be in Maryland and your utility is buying energy from, say, a coal-fired power plant, but then they have to offset it by also buying renewable energy credit, or a REC, from that wind farm in Ohio. So what it ends up doing is the Maryland ratepayers, as they still do today, they pay twice. They pay for that fossil fuel energy, and then they also have to pay for the renewable energy credit to offset it. So it's a little bit of a smoke and mirrors. I wanted to get off of that. It wasn't my idea. There are people that do this for a living that came up with the idea, and I was the one who was just going to champion it and try to get it through Annapolis. But that would have changed it. So Maryland, in a staged way, would have to get to 100% renewable energy by 2035, but it would be direct procurement. Like you would just buy the energy directly from, say, a solar farm, for example, in Maryland, where we would have a chance at actually getting those electrons to our houses that are using the electricity, and the rates that we would be paying would be going to improve renewable infrastructure in Maryland, instead of improving infrastructure in other states and paying for workers in other states with our ratepayer money. That was the idea. The idea, it was wildly popular in theory, less cost to the Maryland ratepayer and actual clean energy. But in politics, timing is everything, and political capital is limited, and you have to decide when you're going to spend it. So it just was too early, and it's still, I guess, too early. We haven't gotten there yet.
And I want to let Owen get to his question, but building off the debate theme, I ran against Cheryl Glenn in 2018, and I was challenging her. She was, I believe, championing the other version of the energy plan
at
the time. And we were challenging her to a public debate about about these two comparisons, right? These two policies. And she did everything she could to avoid having that conversation whatsoever. We got to have a little bit of it at MedChai at one point when they invited both of us. And she was very upset that they had invited us, or they had invited me as well, because she thought she didn't owe having to have a debate with anybody about it, including you for that matter, in a lot of ways, but it was, it's interesting because it is like, back to the theme that we started with, is like the ability to clarify that in a debate might maybe have influenced some folks about what she ended up proposing in 2019, which is what you're talking about as the one that, sort of re-upped on the RPS. So I think that's a useful connection to make here. So, Owen, go ahead. I want to get you back to your question.
Well, Shane, you were kind of talking about your second term and how your perspective towards what was then, your elected position was starting to shift. And as your second and final term was ending and you were leaving the General Assembly, there were some fireworks, right? You kind of left with a flourish, I would say. We were talking about political bravery earlier. You did something kind of really brave and probably something that surprised some folks, which was you switched your party affiliation to Green and became the first Green in the General Assembly in Maryland history. So what can you tell us about that decision? I remember being kind of on the cusp of it at the time and being really excited about it, but I don't know if I ever asked you, what were you thinking and why did you do that?
Well, so I have some regret there because I wish that I didn't. I should have done it sooner. I think there was a point in my legislative career where I thought that I would be able to balance values with the practicality of what the status quo demands and sort of thread that needle, and still be able to be elected as a Democrat, but then also champion values that I believed in. And if that's possible, I was not able to do it. So I might as well have just done it from the beginning. But why I did switch, and it's actually switched back to being a Green, was when from the beginning. Well, the first time I voted in a presidential election or any election was 1996. So that's 30 years ago now. And I was living in Nevada, going to the University of Nevada, Reno, and Ralph Nader was running for president that year. And I heard about him, and some of his ideas excited me. And through that, I heard about the Green Party and was like, oh, cool. The 4 pillars, this makes sense. I believe this, the 10 values. And so that was the first time I really got involved in any political campaign, was going around and getting signatures to get Ralph Nader on the ballot in 1996. And so that was the beginning. And then fast forward, working overseas, and then the nonprofit sector in the United States, and then getting into politics myself, I think somehow I distanced myself from that person who was in college, where I thought that, okay, well, there are certain rules that I need to play by if I'm going to make any change happen, and the change needs to be through the system, and there are guardrails for this, so let me follow those. And then at the end of the day, everything will work out. Well, it didn't work out that way exactly for me, but so I think I just would have been more honest with myself and probably my voters had I just done that earlier. But, hindsight, right?
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, and you were not the only person who was or is in Annapolis, either as an elected or as a lobbyist or doing the advocacy work. I've had this conversation about 96 and 2000 and Nader with a whole bunch of folks who are elected, some who are regular lobbyists and advocates doing that sort of nonprofit advocacy work for the like pushing the edge type of legislation and things like that. 96 was my first election too, and it was the last time I voted for a Democrat in a presidential election. I voted for Bill Clinton that year. I lived in Maryland. My mom had worked for Senator Hollings. I sort of thought it was what I was supposed to do. And then after that, I don't think I voted for a Democrat for president since then. I didn't necessarily embrace like the third parties right away, but I was intrigued by them. I was intrigued by the Green Party. I knew Jason West when he ran for delegate up in New Paltz, or when he ran for mayor up in New Paltz. He and I were coaching Marist debate together at the time. And then I worked for Joel Covell and Pete Seeger for a while. And all of that sort of helped to open my eyes to it. And I think it was much later that I really came to understand the necessity of multi-party politics in order to get out of a system where only two parties can be healthy. I had this conversation I was on a panel with Senator Sidnor last year, and he said, stop calling it a two-party system. You are here, you have a ballot line, and you are influencing outcomes. And at first I was kind of like, okay, whatever. But that's actually a really helpful frame for me to think about it in. It is like multi-party work doesn't always just occur inside, right? Like sometimes the existence of another party is shaping things like the bill we're talking about with the debates and things like that. But I do want to ask what it would look like in a world where there were a couple of people from different parties than Democrat or Republican in the General Assembly. Would it change anything? How would it change it? What would it be like if, say, a couple of Greens, some working class folks, maybe a libertarian, maybe a forward party person were elected to the General Assembly?
Well, I think it would be fantastic. And I think before I came on, I was listening, and I think both of you have already spoken to some of these things. And one is the potential for coalition building. I think that would be huge. If you had a third party, even with a few members, sometimes just a few votes is what makes a difference. So that's going to mean compromise on a bill by strengthening it or weakening it. It could also mean the death of a bill. Sometimes it's more important, many times it's more important to kill bills, right? And you don't want them to pass. And I think it would make it a lot more likely, because it's harder. You mentioned people that you've come across through this work that told the story of 96 or other times when they were working with third parties before they came into the mainstream process, so to speak, or whatever we want to call it. But many of those people, I think, if we were a multi-party system right now, obviously a lot of the Democrats would not be Democrats. And I know that from just being in the General Assembly. I would meet my second term. There was a group of us that were more on the left, or at least left-leaning, that we would unofficially meet and discuss legislation and talk about how we could come together to, affect the outcome in some way. And this is something that eventually leadership got wind of, and it became a problem for us. But if it was a multi-party system, we would have probably been our own party or parties, and we wouldn't have been subject to certain rules of the party that we agreed to be part of. We would be outside of that. It makes vote counting more difficult. I think it would slow the process down, but in a good way. Because right now, if the party gets behind something, the party meaning the Democrats in this case, if they get behind something, they can get something rolling, and it becomes very hard to stop. But and the Republicans often can't do it. They just don't have the votes, and they're going to be marginalized. But if you have another party then that can join with them, or the Democrats, depending on what the language of the bill looks like, then I think it makes a big difference. So I think it would be fantastic.
Yeah, I think so too. And one of the things that I talk to Republicans about a lot of times is like, you all need to realize that you are not breaking the supermajority by yourselves, right? Like they will say, this is going to be the year that we break the supermajority. And I'm like, where are you getting those 17 seats that you would need to pick
Right.
up? And it's like, you're not winning your district, right? No Republican is winning the district that you ran in. No Republican is winning the district that I ran in. You were 38, is that right?
Sorry.
You were district 38, right?
Oh,
38.
my district. I was 39. Yeah.
39, right? Like
Yeah.
all of those Montgomery County, Prince George's County, Baltimore City districts, there's no way that Republicans are going to make a dent in those, but a working class party, a Green Party, a Ujima People's Progress Party that can begin to shift those coalitions in a way that can begin to threaten the supermajority a little bit. And one of the things that we've been talking about here is like supermajorities for Democrats and state legislatures are actually more conservative, create more conservative outcomes in some ways than you would think. People say the Democrats control everything here. We should be able to do whatever we want. And I think there would be much more aggressive and progressive policy if they weren't trying to protect that supermajority, that veto-proof majority, because it is like now you've shrunk a 19-seat lead into a 4-seat lead or something like that, and you're worried about those purple districts and things like that, and all of the compromise goes to the folks who could lose to a Republican. If there was suddenly a Green in your district who could beat somebody in that district, then the sort of political gravity of the situation can go the other direction, and I think that
Right.
I think that type of thing, like I was having a conversation with some comment on some tweet of Bob Ehrlich's the other day. I don't know why I do this, but I did. And what was interesting was the people were like, what is it you have to offer in order to break the supermajority? And I'm like, the Republicans need to stop seeing themselves as the perpetual loser and the perpetual second out of two, and start seeing themselves as the second strongest in a multi-party coalition. And look, I actually think if we had less Democrats elected, there was more competition on their left, they would be more progressive. I don't actually think they would be more what the Republicans want them to be. I think they would be more aggressive about environmental protections. They'd be more progressive about labor protections because they'd want to win those seats back on the left that they had lost before. So I don't know. I think that the perspective of somebody who's there helping to explain how it would be different, and the piece being the key piece being coalition, cooperation, and realigning those coalitions a little bit so it's not in a binary, feels very powerful, and like one of the things that we need to be working toward.
Absolutely. And I think it's something that I think it's something that's doable in the hopefully short term, but at least the medium term. I think things are changing. Everything changes. It's the one thing we can count on, right? And I think that we will get to a multi-party system in Maryland at some point. Hopefully the country.
Yeah, and I mean, we have the hardest part in the House, right? We have multi-member districts. That's the hardest part, I think, to help us get there. We can do proportional representation with multi-member districts. I think it would be hard if we had single-member districts to convince people to take multi-member districts. But I think with existing multi-member districts, we might be able to convince people to think about how we vote differently.
Right.
Yeah. So going kind of back to the example we were talking about, the energy bill that you had introduced, and we talked to Andy brought up a little bit about how one of his opponents when he was running for delegate in 2018 was on the other had an alternative. And so can we just lay these two side by side so that everyone, myself included, kind of understands what the difference between the two was at the time, what ended up passing, and then maybe we can think about how did that affect where we are today, 6-7 years later.
You said the meme. I heard it come up before. Sorry,
That's right.
I'm in the classroom, so this is like there would be fireworks right now. Um, but yeah, it has been 6 or 7 years, hasn't it? Or 8. But so it's been a while for me. So I'm going to try to, if both of you are, I think, knowledgeable on this bill too. So correct me if I miss something or if I'm wrong here. But my memory and understanding of the legislation I was championing then versus the other legislation, I think, can be summed up this way. Both were going for a certain target by a certain time. And mine was more aggressive. It was like 100%, right? And we're going to do it by 2035. The other bill, I think, was 2030, so earlier, but it would be 50%. So you've got, the numbers are different, but we're still trying to get to a renewable amount, a renewable level. I think for a lot of people, it stopped there because those are the headlines, right? But really, they're so much different than that. Maryland is currently on this renewable portfolio standard that we were on then and we're still on today. And that means that there are things that are considered, types of energy that are considered renewable within the state. And that's the renewable energy that we want to incentivize. And it's not buy directly, it's incentivized by a certain date. So for that bill, 2030, 50%. So 50% of renewable energy we needed to be on 50% renewable energy by 2030. But the way you could get it would be for, like, say, Exelon, for example, could purchase energy from anywhere on the grid. And that energy could be coal powered or any other, dirty fossil fuel energy. And then they would offset it by buying renewable energy credits. So they would buy credits to offset the dirty energy that they purchased. And that would count towards that 50% that they were trying to get to. So the first problem is we're actually using the fossil fuel energy and we would be paying for it. So we are still incentivizing fossil fuel energy directly by just buying those are the electrons that we're getting to power whatever we're powering it, our homes and businesses. And then we would be paying again to purchase the renewable energy credits on a market. This is on a market, right? Probably somewhere else on the PJM grid. So, and it could be, I mentioned, a possible wind farm in Ohio. It could just as easily be in West Virginia or Pennsylvania or somewhere. But those are all out of state. So it's Maryland ratepayer dollars going out of state to help, fund infrastructure somewhere else. And also that energy that we're paying to that wind farm in Ohio, well, the energy has actually already been used, right? So there are people in Ohio that have used, those electrons have gone through the power lines and they've powered whatever they're going to power. Meanwhile, we're paying again just to kind of offset the dirty energy that we bought down here. So to me, when I figured this out, which took longer than it should have probably, when this was brought to me, I was like, this is crazy. Why would we do it this way? Other than to have a market that people can make money off of, right? So the simplest way is just to buy it directly. Then you go into a power purchasing agreement, a long-term power purchasing agreement with a solar company or a wind farm, for example, and then you're getting the power directly from those sources, and you're paying them, and they're using that money to help build their infrastructure. It ends up being a lot cheaper for ratepayers over time. It can be more expensive in the beginning, like with all renewable energy, there's an upfront cost. You have to build the infrastructure, but once you've built it and it's going, these are marginal costs afterwards. So it would have ended up being a lot cheaper for Marylanders and better for the environment because we would actually be using clean energy instead of just, using dirty energy and then buying credits to offset it. Kind of like, you fly across the Atlantic and you pay to plant a few trees in Brazil, and you're like, okay, well, there's no problem then. Haha.
Yeah, there's sort of a greenwashing element to it, right? Like,
sort of.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So there's certainly a greenwashing element, and that was the difference. But you need time to explain it. And if you're just looking at the names of the bills, the other one looked more reasonable, like 100% by 2035. 50 sounds more reasonable, and there are clean jobs involved in it. It says so in the title.
It says so in the title, right? Right.
Yeah.
And some of that clean jobs was like working at the trash incinerator, right? That was part of that portfolio at the time. And I think it's interesting to talk about this now, because at the opening day summit today, I would say a quarter of what got talked about was energy prices, and how much energy prices are, and how much the PJM grid is broken for us, and how much we're having to get our energy from out of state. And it is like, there was a solution on the table that foresaw all these problems, and had a whole bunch of sponsors, right? Like, it's not as if it was Shane standing up there alone being like, I know I'm right on this. You had a lot of sponsors. There were a lot of folks behind it. And it was right. We can look back with hindsight and say, if we had done what you did today, people in Maryland, or if we had done what that bill proposed instead of what happened in 2019, Marylanders would be paying way less for our energy. We would have built some independence from the PJM grid, and we would not be entirely dependent on this sort of industry captured regulatory body that is like determining that we have to purchase gas energy from Ohio, and it's very interesting because, Governor Moore, I don't know if you heard this part of it, but Governor Moore, Governor Shapiro, Governor Youngkin, and Governor Murphy, on behalf of the data center lobby, put in a proposal to PJM for this thing called Bring Your Own Generation for the data centers. And that is sort of what everybody is talking about at this point, including somebody I was on a panel with recently from the Sierra Club. And I was like, this is a terrible thing. This is license for data center operators to build their own nuclear plants and to build their own gas fracking plants co-located on the site with the data center. And it is like, just like we had the courage to ban fracking, I think we need to have the courage to ban these hyperscale data centers, and not say the only solution to this problem is focused through the energy bill mindset, right? When the only way we're looking at data centers is their effect on the energy bill, then there's sort of bipartisan consensus that we should put a frac gas plant right there on the data center property. But when we have a more holistic ecological view of it, and we have a future focused view of it, like your bill did in 2018, we can avoid getting into these mistakes that happened. And I guess that leads me to this question that is like, what does this process with these two bills say? And maybe what does this say about how Annapolis works? What bills that it likes? What solutions it likes, even if they're not the best solution, and how good solutions get shut down for bad ones?
Well, I wish I had a complete answer for that. I think it's a complicated question that I only have one sense or opinion of. I mean, for me, I guess the first part is, most people, when they go to a place like Annapolis, they have good intentions, and they want to do it because they want to affect some kind of change for their neighborhood or their district or their part of the state, or there's an issue that's been impacting people that they want to work on. Most people are there to do that. The system is set up in such a way where once you get down there, your kind of position in it and how much change you can affect depends on your position, I should say, to a degree. But in order to get to the position, you have to behave a certain way. So there's political capital, right? Behave a certain way in other bills that you may not care about, or compromise on other things. So you're playing this game, so to speak, in order to get what you ultimately want, that hopefully is going to make people in your neck of the woods have a better life, right? So you're trying to do that. And the committee appointments, and we just saw the big unleashing of all the current committee appointments, right? And some of them were really exciting, and I think they're really good. But those are positions that people need in order to get something through, because committee chairs in the Maryland General Assembly really matter. They really matter to this process. And we've seen historically, it's very few bills that die after they make it through committee in the House, for example. Most, if they make it through that process, they get through, which gives a huge amount of power to the chairs. So for that bill, the chairs, and it was co-assigned, it was duly assigned, I guess, to the, if I remember correctly, I think it was in the Economic Matters Committee, who was chaired by Derek Davis at the time. He's now secretary, or he's treasurer of Maryland, and Kumar Barve in the Environment and Transportation Committee. So it had to go through both of those. So extra hurdles, right? And had to pass both before it would get a floor vote. And it went down, I don't remember which committee killed it, but I don't think it had the votes in the Economic Matters Committee. And so I think, after that, I just withdrew the bill. But the people on the committee like the bill, though. So that's the thing. And I think that's what gets to your question. If you just went to them on the street and said, hey, would you like to do this? They would say, yeah, I would. But what it says about Annapolis is just liking policy isn't what matters. It's everything behind it. And who doesn't like the policy would be, for example, the utilities, or anybody working with the RPS or benefiting from it or involved in it. So they don't like it, and they have power in this game too, right? People need to get reelected to office. The utilities are very powerful in that regard, right? They have lobbyists that are there that basically live there. And they're people that are very well informed on the mechanisms of Annapolis and how it works, and they know where to insert pressure and which part of the process matters, which meetings to show up to. And if you're always there, you're paid attention to. And then also, if you're making, just the reality of our political system, if you're making campaign donations, this is going to help. Obviously, you can't donate during the 90-day session, but if you're helping people get reelected, that's going to have an effect too. So there's money in it, and then in access, and then just pressure at all the right pressure points. And I think if you're just a regular delegate, you're going to think, well, am I going to stick my neck out right now and really go for this? Or should I just let it die and then we'll just do it another year? Because that's the other thing. There's always next year, right? And you can tell yourself this story. Oh, it's okay. We'll do it next year. I like this. It's just not the right time. But it is the right time. Now is the right time, right? Now is the only time that we have. And next year is always going to be too late for these things. But you need people sticking their neck out, which I think if there was a third party, you would have another venue to be able to talk about this and get some pressure and get just stronger legislation like this. Because you would be threatening people on the left too, because there are a lot of districts that do care about this. And their delegates might be able to ignore it because they never had to touch it. It never even got to their committee. So they can co-sponsor it and say, I'm a champion of this, but they never had any actual skin in the game because they didn't have to vote on it. It never was voted on the House floor.
Yeah, and if you are upset, if you're listening and you are upset about your energy bill right now, there's a lot of explanation for how we got here. But this conversation that we're having with Shane tonight is a really important one that locked in the system we have, locked in the mechanisms that we have. So it is like, don't let anybody tell you it's just about data centers. Don't let anybody tell you it's just about whatever they're going to tell you, just the utilities or whatever. It is political decisions that were made when a choice was presented to legislators, and they chose a policy that led us predictably to where we are. So I think it's important, as energy becomes central to everybody, as we've watched the prices of energy go up incredibly high, that this is a result of decisions made by people in Annapolis. It's a result of decisions made by people in other places too, but people in Annapolis were forced with the choice 6 or 7 years ago that got us here. And that's why it's important to keep an eye on this stuff. And that's why it's important to build pressure. And that's why it's important to build parties outside of it, so we don't find ourselves here a decade later because of some decision that gets made this year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think, Jane, you did a really excellent job of talking about committee structures and chairs and the lobbyist side of thing, and kind of the process and the decision-making that happens on that side. To put a little bit of optimism on it, although your urgency is optimistic, what about on the people powered, folks who are watching who want to be involved in the legislative process? Like, what did you see that was helpful, or from a grassroots standpoint, in terms of the process and the decision making during your time in the assembly?
Well, I think anytime you go down and meet with your members, I think it's important, because you're an actual voter, and that's more important than campaign donations, because you're actually the one who's going to vote. So I think going down and meeting is worthwhile. It's hard, right? Depending on where your district is and where you live, you have work, you have families, whatever obligations. It's hard to pick up and then find time to do this kind of thing. But the lobbyists are there. They live there. They're there at night. They're out right now. It is 8:09 p.m. in Annapolis. Everything's done for the evening. People are on Main Street at Red Wine, and they're at all the other places talking, and they're talking about all the legislation, and they're having a good time. So that's where the lobbyists are right now. So you, as somebody who's not going to do that, because you're a reasonable person, probably, you'll be home. But make time to go down if you can. For legislation that you care about, you can get on the website, the General Assembly website, and look up the bill, and you can look at the fiscal note. It's called a policy and fiscal note. Have a read through that. It'll explain more about the bill, but it'll also give it'll highlight the money that's involved and other key pressure points, which I think it's useful. It's a useful read, and it'll also give you the timeline of the bill and thus far. And the website will give you the full timeline, and you can also watch hearings. But if you look at the fiscal note before your meeting with your member, I think those are good things. But really, it's the more that you can be there, the more time that you have to be involved in the process, the better. Because there's this whole series of steps that the legislation is going to take. And those steps are more important than the headlines that you'll see about the bill. The headlines come out afterwards, but the schedule for the bill, whatever bill it is going to be posted, and it'll be happening in real time. And those meetings are open. You can go into them. You can go to subcommittee meetings. You can go to committee meetings, and you can see the whole thing play out. You have just as much access in that regard as anybody else, including the lobbyists. So if you, depending on how much you care about a piece of legislation, I would say do that, because the press isn't there anymore. There's never going to be enough press to cover thousands of bills that have myriad steps before passage. But now, really, nobody is there. So you're not hearing about these things back home from the press. You can read about it from people's opinions and blog posts, and but there's not good press coverage anymore. So you really have to go. And that's it. I don't want to say it's by design. It is, there's no architect to this design, but it is by design, because the less people are involved, the easier it is to control the process. It becomes more difficult when you have a bunch of voters down there watching what's happening and weighing in on it because they'll have to listen to you. But right now, it's got to be 99.9% of those meetings that are happening don't have any member of the public. There'll be lobbyists and members and their staff, and they're there. And there may be somebody from the Baltimore Sun if you're lucky, but they're there and they're making the decisions, and that's it. You hear about it later after it's passed and become law. So
I think that's really useful insight, and I think it's important to put some hope into agency too, right? The system is structured in a way that favors the powerful, and people in their communities have power too. And one of the and so I'm very critical of the political establishment. And in 2024, I was the lead advocate on a bill giving credit to immigrant community college students, and we were able to pass it, right? So it is possible, even with a lot of the deck stacked against grassroots initiatives, even though it's much harder than it should be, which is what Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle said in their quote in the Baltimore Sun. It is possible to make positive change. It would be easier in a multi-party system. It'd be better. And we're running outside of the political establishment for exactly that reason. And also, I think it, especially on state policy, it's important to pay attention because, on our bill, I think there were a couple, lobbyists and government relations people who submitted testimony, but we were able to have more people, just like, teachers and students and immigrant rights supporters submit testimony written or in our panels on our side. So it is possible to beat them sometimes at their own game, even if it is their game.
Right.
And I think you can see this piece of it. It's like one of the things that I love to do, like I'm a nerd for the Maryland General Assembly website, right? But like I like to look through the testimony that people are giving, right? And see what organizations are testifying on what things and what way. As you say, the same people are down there all the time. So if you see the name of somebody who is testifying on a bill for an organization, you can search their name because they probably testify on a lot of bills. That's part of their job, is to testify on bills. And I think you can start to see when you read the written testimony that comes in from the utilities, for example, you can see what arguments they're making. You can see what they're saying to folks. You can see that type of thing. And I think it's helpful for folks to understand that information is there and it is available. But it is hard, right? Like it's time consuming to have to be down there. It can be really deflating to take a day off of work, pay $20 for parking, wait 7 hours to testify, get to talk 2 minutes, have nobody ask you any questions, and then
go eat a
potato, right? I always try to go to and eat a potato.
That's I knew it was coming. I knew it.
Yeah, Potato Valley.
Potato Valley, gotta go to Potato Valley. If nothing else, if you get to testify for 2 minutes and nobody asks you a question, at least go have a potato at Potato Valley. That's my advice for going to Annapolis. But what would it look like for folks that did want to stay informed and stay and pay attention? Like what is the sort of civic democratic infrastructure that would need to be built to make it so that people can be informed about this stuff without having to go there, right? Like without having to drive down to Annapolis during the workday and watch them all the time. Well, how do we build this thing that lets people stay informed on their own, that isn't just filtered through whatever the legislative agenda is of somebody whose emails they subscribe to?
Yeah. Well, I mean, That's a great question. One thing that I didn't bring up that you highlighted, which I think is really important, is that you can now get the testimony online. This is something that's new, and the recording of testimony and all of that has been good for transparency. You just have to be able to know how to find it and then actually find it, which can be challenging if you want to look at one, at least for me, if I want to find a certain bill and when the testimony happened, it can take me a minute. And I think if you're just, and I was down there, and if you're not down there, I think there is a learning curve. But I know that people that I would see that were down there a lot and testifying a lot were usually part of some kind of group. Oftentimes they would be a nonprofit. Well, they generally always were, but I was doing a lot of environmental legislation. So you would have like Sierra Club volunteers that would be down there a lot and doing that. But again, that's not being informed at home. That's people actually being there, and they're directly informing themselves. So I think that's tough right now. I'm sure there would be a way to I mean, I don't want to say use AI, because we're already talking about the data centers and the amount of power and water and everything that would create. But I think there's probably some way to be able to parse all of that data that's just getting put up on the website and make some sense of it in a way that would take less time than somebody at home with a limited amount of time trying to read through and make sense of everything.
Yeah,
I would think. But I
think this is a direction we have to explore, because I don't think there's an answer to it right now. Right? Yeah. I think right now the answer is follow the orgs, follow and join the orgs, and go there. Yeah. So.
Mm-hmm. So Shane, when we were reconnecting after a couple of years, we were talking about both being teachers, and you said you're teaching Spanish, right?
Yes.
So you're teaching Spanish. It's 2026, the year after kind of fake executive order came out declaring English the official language, which I just read. Actually, the president doesn't have the authority to do. I read an interesting policy brief on that. But so you're, language teachers of the world unite. So what are some things that you're excited about, either in your teaching or in your life, you're excited about for 2026?
Well, I mean, 2026 hasn't got off to the greatest start on paper, or in the actual world, especially depending on where you are and who you are, since people are getting directly targeted. But I think the bright pieces of 2026 are that all of this mayhem is really causing people to question structure and agencies and the way things have normally worked. Because the way things have normally worked, it's what got us here, right? This is where we are because of everything that's happened in the past. So I think the opportunity is to continue to fuel people's desire to question, and the more that they can question current structures, I think the more chance we'll have to make changes that are going to benefit everybody. Because my time in the legislature was very much the sort of lockdown. You had President Miller, who'd been there for a quarter of a century, and Speaker Mike Bush, that was at the time was the longest serving Speaker of the House, and the committee chairs had all been committee chairs for a long time. Now things are changing. We have a new speaker. She was awesome as a delegate when I worked with her when I was in the House of Delegates. She always seemed to be on the right side of issues, which to me, just on that, and I haven't spoken with her since I left the legislature. I've lost day-to-day communication with a lot of people, but I can't imagine that she's not the same person deep down. So that gives me a little hope. She moved the Energy Committee back to the Environment Committee, which I think is useful for not the energy. The Energy Subcommittee off of the Economic Matters Committee. It went back to Environment. I think that is potentially useful for getting energy legislation passed that we've been talking about. But yeah, just structure. I think now's the time to really push third parties too. I think it's hard to argue against Bill 101. I really do. And I think if I was a Republican, I would certainly want it, and that's, there are enough Republicans in the state to get a governor every once in a while.
Yeah, I think it is designed to make it hard to argue against. I think that bill is designed in a way that people will argue against it, but I think it is designed as sort of a trap, right? Like the easiest thing to do, if I'm a Democrat in Annapolis, the easiest thing to do is to just let it die in committee and hope somebody will do that for me, right? Because arguing against it actually starts to expose a whole bunch of the ways that the structure protects itself and things like that. We hope that the easiest thing to do for them is to just pass it, and take our thunder away and just say, okay, great, we'll see you on the debate stage, right? Like if I were advising the governor, if the governor is listening and wants to know right now, I would tell you to embrace this bill, get it passed, and then tell the world that you allowed third parties onto the debate stage because you wanted independent voices to be heard. If the governor asked me for one bit of advice, it would be embrace this, don't fight it. I don't think that's going to be what happens, but I think that it is an interesting bill in that regard, because it's one of those things where the more you talk about it, the worse it gets for you, I think, so Shane, this is awesome. Like, I've been really looking forward to this today. I was looking forward to being in Annapolis today for the pomp and circumstance and all of that, but I was also really looking forward to having the chance to talk to you tonight, because I know that you have the perspective on this stuff that is really important, and I know you were doing the work on one of the key issues that we're facing right now as a state several years ago. I think that it's important to understand how stuff happens, how decisions that get made in Annapolis affect us, not just the day after they're signed, but for a long time, and what we need to do in order to generate the movements that can build us toward a new system. Because the moment of crisis is here. The world is going to get remade. And the question is, are we going to remake it so that it is more tilted toward democracy, more tilted toward peace, more tilted toward ecology, and more tilted toward justice? Or are we going to let the people who are remaking it right now remake it in their image for the billionaires and for the fascists? And I think we're at this moment of decision right now, and it is great to talk to somebody who had to make those decisions with that in mind. So,
well, thank you. It's been wonderful being on here, and thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's great, and we would love to have you back anytime you want. We can talk more about energy or teaching or whatever, but we would love to have you back anytime you want. We're so excited to have you here today, and just thank you so much.
Yeah,
thank you.
People's
Thank you so much, and I'll be cheering you guys on.
Excellent. Thank you, Shane. Talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.